My family always relied on me financially, but when I stopped helping, they turned me into the villain. After years of supporting my family, I was expelled and accused of being selfish. There have been other occasions over the years when I felt ignored, such as birthdays when Mark would receive the pricey presents while I received something useful like new socks or a coat, or vacations when his family had all the attention while I sat quietly on the sidelines. It didn't matter, I told myself. I assumed that was just the nature of parents. In addition, I had always been self-sufficient. I didn't require the attention or the hype. Things changed even further once Mark married Becky and had his first son, Jason. Mark was suddenly more than simply the favorite, he was the one who brought us grandchildren. Now that they could proudly call themselves grandparents, my parents were ecstatic, feeling as though their lives had been completed. Though I couldn't help but feel a little invisible in my own family, I was also pleased for him. I dismissed it though, since family helps family, as I've always told myself. This is where it all began to go south. Mark lost his job at the conclusion of the previous year. His business was among the first to close when the small retail chain he worked for began closing its sites. It was awful. I was genuinely sorry for him. I recall Becky sobbing when she called my parents, concerned about how they would make ends meet on her meager part-time bakery salary. They were devastated to lose Mark's paycheck since, shocking as it may seem, he wasn't the best with money. However, my parents' solution was to ask him, Becky, and their 2 children to move in with them rather than helping him come up with a practical strategy to get back on his feet. It may seem acceptable on paper. Family stays together through difficult times, and they have room. The space they so kindly offered was mine, and that was the problem. It took place on a Sunday evening. I had just returned from a lengthy work trip, fatigued, and all I wanted was a bed and a shower. I sensed something was wrong the moment I went through the door. At the kitchen table, my parents were waiting for me. Dad was silent as usual, tinkering with his watch, and Mom had her typical worried expression. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk," Mom remarked. Suddenly tense, I sat down after dropping my bag beside the door. Mother didn't mince words. "You know how hard things have been for your brother since he lost his job. He's got Becky and the kids to worry about, and they really don't have anywhere else to go." My heart sank. I could already see where this was going. Even though I knew the answer before I spoke, I nevertheless inquired, "So where are they going to stay?" Mom's smile was as if she had practiced it 100 times. "The basement suite is perfect for them. It's separate from the main house, so they'll have their privacy. Becky and the kids will be comfortable there." I glanced at her, attempting to take it all in. "Wait, my basement suite? Where am I supposed to go?" Dad spoke up at last, although in a hushed tone. "We've set up the hobby room for you. It's cozy. You'll have plenty of space." What I was hearing was unbelievable. It was a glorified closet, the hobby room. It housed Mom's sewing machine, containers of seasonal decorations, half-finished projects, and stacks of fabric. It wasn't a bedroom at all. In the hopes that this was some strange prank, I asked, "You're kidding, right?" Mom became defensive in her tone. "It's only temporary, Sarah. Besides, this is our house, and we need to make decisions that benefit the family as a whole. You'll be fine in the hobby room for now." It was the old-fashioned statement. "It's our house." I sat there in startled silence as the talk came to a close, and my parents congratulated themselves on their generosity and helpfulness. I was not a big argue. What was the purpose? I didn't like it, but Mark was moving in. Neither my comfort nor my space mattered. That evening, I packed up my laptop, clothes, and toiletries. I gazed at my tiny suite in the basement, which I had turned into my home in recent years. It was mine, even though it wasn't flawless. I had my favorite scented candles, comfortable blankets on the couch, and bookshelves full of literature. It was all being torn away from me now to make room for Mark and his family. They didn't even ask, which was the worst part. It was determined for me, as if my opinions were completely irrelevant, and there was no discussion, no family gathering, and no, "Sarah, how do you feel about this?" Not in the hobby room, not in a house where I was obviously only a supporting part in someone else's story. I knew by the next morning that I couldn't stay. I therefore devised a strategy. I reserved a reasonably priced all-inclusive resort in the Florida Keys for the 2 weeks I had off in between job trips. It wasn't elegant, but it was less expensive than buying food and paying $1,600 for a property I no longer even lived in. It also included calm and tranquility, 2 things I really needed. My parents seemed uninterested in my plan when I informed them about it. The actual turmoil didn't start until I left, even though Mom responded, "Well, if that's what you need to do." My phone buzzed 2 days into my vacation at the resort. It was Mom's message. Mom. Hey Sarah, where's the money for rent and groceries this month? We're counting on it to help support Mark and the kids. Speechless, I gazed at the letter. She couldn't be serious, surely. When I gave her a call back, we had a conversation that went something like this. Mom, I don't live there anymore. Why would I pay rent? Because we're still a family, Sarah. You know we're all in a bind right now, and Mark needs that space more than you do. But you gave away my space, I'm not even there. At that point, Dad called, his voice firmer than normal. You can't just leave your family hanging like this. We raised you better than that. Talking to a wall was like that. They insisted on the same thing no matter what I said. I was self-centered. I was leaving my family behind. I also had a responsibility to Mark's troubles. Then Mark called and added his voice. Sarah, you don't understand. I have a family to take care of. You don't need the space like we do. I lost my temper. Mark, when you had your job, did you ever send Mom and Dad money to help out? No, you spent it all on yourself. So why am I supposed to bail you out now? That temporarily silenced him. I was trembling with rage by the time the call was over. I had been the one keeping everything together for years, taking care of my parents, making the payments, and being the responsible one. For what purpose? To be ejected from my personal space and accused of selfishness for standing my ground. I came to a realization at that point. This was no longer about supporting my family, it has to do with control. They betrayed me after I declined to play a part they had never asked me to play. Out of guilt, I sent Mom $400 for food, but that was all. I would no longer continue to support their lives at the price of myself. I was unaware at the time that this was only the beginning. The whole family would be rocked by my determination to defend myself, and I would never have encountered such a strong reaction. After I refused to continue paying for a place I no longer occupied, things quickly fell apart. I had no idea how far my parents and the rest of my family would go to keep me in line, even if I felt the guilt trip during that initial phone call was awful. The Florida Keys all-inclusive resort was meant to be my haven, a place where I could relax and get my mind straight. I wasn't spending $1,600 a month in a basement suite from which I had been evicted, for once. Everything I needed was there in the small bungalow I rented: good meals, a view of the pool, and most importantly, tranquility. It was like a taste of freedom, something I had been longing for but had not even understood. However, that tranquility was short-lived. My phone was constantly buzzing with missed calls and texts on the third day of my visit. Mom. Sarah, we're disappointed in you. This isn't what family does. Dad. It's not fair to leave us hanging like this. Are you only concerned with yourself, Mark? Every communication was like a kick to the gut. It was obvious that Mark had joined my parents' campaign to wear me down since they were unrelenting. At first, I didn't respond to any of them. The texts continued, despite my assurances that I needed time and that they would ultimately stop bothering me. Then came the phone calls. Out of pure exasperation, I picked up once, only to hear Mark's voice on the other end. His tone was accusatory, as if he had practiced the question. You know what you're doing to Mom and Dad, right? They're struggling. The house is too expensive, and now they're trying to help me and my family. You're making it worse by leaving. I don't get how you can be so selfish. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Selfish? I asked again, attempting to remain composed. You took my space, Mark. I'm not even living there anymore. Why would I keep paying for something I don't have? It's not about space, Sarah. It's about family. I have kids to think about, and you don't. You should be helping out more, not running away. Its daring was astounding. Here was my brother, who had mismanaged his finances for years, telling me that I owed him money to support his children. I ended the call. At the time, that was the only answer I could come up with. I was beginning to feel like I couldn't get out at the end of the week. Even though my parents lived in Riverside, 1,000 miles away, their comments followed me everywhere. There was a new message waiting for me each time I looked at my phone. The tone fluctuated, at times expressing rage, guilt, or an odd mix of the two. Mom. Sarah, think of Jason and the kids. They're just little boys. Do you really want them to suffer because you're being stubborn? Dad. You owe it to us. We took care of you when you were younger, now it's your turn. Mark. You'll regret this when the kids remember how their aunt turned her back on them. Nor were the texts the only thing. My extended family became interested. I began receiving calls from relatives I hardly knew, Uncle Gary, Aunt Linda, and others I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunt Linda? Sarah. Honey, she said on a single call. I'm sure you don't mean to upset your parents like this. They've done so much for you. Can't you just help a little longer? Mark really needs it right now. I felt like screaming. Bitterly, I thought, a little longer? What was the slightly longer duration? 1 more month? A year? Forever? I had been paying more than my fair share for years, but nobody seemed to care. The day following my return from the Keys was the last straw. I was in the middle of unpacking when my little Columbus apartment was knocked on. My parents were standing there when I opened it. With a heavy folder gripped in her hands, Mom appeared worn out but resolute. Although his presence loomed like a silent threat, Dad remained mute as usual. Stunned, I said, "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here?" Mom exclaimed, "We need to talk," as she walked into the living room, sweeping by me. I was forced to let them in after Dad pursued her. As if they owned the place, they took a seat on my couch. Mom began laying out documents on the coffee table after opening the folder. I knew right away what they were: supermarket receipts, repair estimates, and utility bills. "Sarah," she said, "we can't do this without you. Look at these expenses. The mortgage is still due, the roof needs repairs before winter, and Mark's kids need school supplies. We need your help." Stunned, I gazed at her. "I'm not living there anymore. Why should I pay for any of this?" Dad yelled. "Because you're part of this family. At last. Family sticks together when times are tough. You don't just run off because things get hard." I could feel my anger erupting. "You didn't ask me, Dad. You didn't ask how I felt about giving up my space. You just decided for me, and now you want me to keep paying for it? That's insane." Even if Mom's tone softened, the manipulation was obvious. "Honey, think of Jason and Liam. They don't understand why their aunt isn't helping. We just want to keep this family together." For me, that was the turning point. This had nothing to do with groceries, the mortgage, or even Mark's children. Control was at issue here. I was always supposed to be the good girl, the responsible daughter who would keep everything running smoothly, according to my parents. And they had no idea how to respond now that I wasn't complying. I got up and gestured to the door. "I think you should go." Mom's eyes got big. "Sarah." "No," I cut in. "I'm serious. You need to go." Dad appeared truly astonished for the first time. "They never expected me to resist, I believe." Mom remarked. "We're just trying to do what's best for the family," as they walked slowly to the door. I didn't answer. I locked the door after they had left. Then I sat trembling on the couch. My family's expectations, my personal wants, the years I'd spent being the good daughter, and the covert sacrifice of my financial independence so they could live comfortably were all on my mind as I lay awake that night. I realized then that I had been facilitating this scenario for years. They became reliant on me as soon as I began making money. They expected more from me the more I contributed. Mark's poor life management was not my fault, and I had no obligation to correct it. However, liberation was not going to be simple. I told my parents to back off, but they weren't going to do it. I would have to battle for my life if I wanted it back. At that point, I decided. I would continue to assist them when I could, but I would no longer allow them to dictate how I behaved. If I didn't live in the house, I wouldn't pay for it. I wouldn't feel bad about refusing to pay Mark's mortgage or his children's school supplies. I texted Mom one final time the following morning. "I can't continue to pay for everything, even though I love you. I'm not an ATM, but I'll assist when I can. Please be mindful of that." In less than an hour, the response was received. "Mom, I can't believe you're doing this to us, Sarah. We're family." I didn't respond. I felt like I was regaining control of my life for the first time in years. I foolishly believed that I had seen the worst of it, that perhaps, just perhaps, they would give me some breathing room after my parents' surprise visit and the onslaught of guilt-tripping texts. I was mistaken. In my family, it turns out that advocating for yourself is the same as declaring war. It creates a full-fledged tsunami rather than simply a ripple. The next stage of this conflict was a virtual family gathering, where everyone with a phone and an opinion had a front-row ticket to my crucifixion, in typical Evans family manner. An email was the first step. "Mom. Sarah, we've scheduled a family meeting for this Sunday at 3 p.m. It's important. Your aunts, uncles, and cousins will be there, please don't miss it." Of all the passive-aggressive things I had ever read, that please, was it? A meeting with the entire family? It was unbelievable to me. Was it really their intention to humiliate me by gathering the whole extended family? Did they believe that I might be fixed in some way by a mass ambush? I nearly forgot to log in. I considered completely disregarding it and letting them all shout into space, but I knew deep down that doing so would only serve to strengthen their story. Sarah's avoiding us because she knows she's wrong. I therefore set an alarm for 2:55 p.m., with a terrible feeling in my stomach, and joined the video conference. My parents, brother Mark, Aunt Linda, Uncle Gary, cousin Rachel, and a few more relatives who only ever showed up at weddings and Christmas dinners were all present when the screen loaded. I glanced at the squares on the screen, and I could tell from the reticent looks that I was going to be put to the death. The first person to speak was Mom, and she wasted no time in doing so. Her voice was filled with fake concern, as if I were a lost child rather than an adult who dared to put herself first. "Sarah, we're all here because we're concerned about you and the decisions you've been making lately." I remained quiet as they planned their speech. The next 30 minutes were a haze of guilt-tripping and accusations from all sides of the screen. Aunt Linda's response: "Sarah, we're all family here. You can't just turn your back when people are struggling. Mark and the kids need support right now. We all pitch in when times are tough." Uncle Gary says, "Your parents have done everything for you. Now, when it's your turn to step up, you're acting like it's too much to ask. Family comes first." Aunt Rachel: "I want to be independent, but you don't just cut off your family. That's not how we were raised." Naturally, Mark then added his voice: "Do you know how hard it is for Becky and me right now? The kids don't understand why their aunt suddenly doesn't care about them. Jason asked me the other day why you don't want to see them anymore. What am I supposed to tell him?" It was a powerful blow. Although I adore my nephews, Mark was well aware of his actions. He was using them as a weapon against me, manipulating the circumstances to paint me as a cold-blooded monster. After what seemed like hours, they finally gave me the opportunity to speak. Despite my trembling palms, I inhaled deeply and unmuted myself. "Look," I remarked, attempting to maintain a steady tone. "I love this family. I do. And I've been helping for years. Paying rent, paying for groceries, doing whatever I could to keep things running. But this is too much." Mom's expression tightened, but I persisted. "I'm not living at home anymore. You gave my space away without even asking me, and now you're expecting me to keep paying for it. That's not fair. You're all acting like I'm abandoning you, but I'm just trying to take care of myself for once." There was silence in the room. I wasn't done yet, but I could see Mom shaking her head and getting ready to respond. "Mark," I uttered while looking straight at his video square. "You're my brother, and I care about you, but you've never been responsible with your money. When you had a job, did you send money to Mom and Dad to help out? No, you spent it on yourself. And now, when you're in trouble, suddenly I'm the bad guy for not bailing you out." Despite his hot face, Mark remained silent. I added, "And the rest of you," as I turned to face my extended family. "Where were you when I was the one keeping everything afloat? None of you had anything to say when I was paying $1,600 a month for a basement suite I only lived in half the time. But the second I draw a boundary, suddenly I'm selfish." The ensuing hush was deafening. Uncle Gary was frowning, Aunt Linda was scandalized, and my mother was about to cry. Dad refused to look into my eyes as he sat there with his arms folded. Mom finally said something. "Sarah, we just don't understand why you're acting like this. This isn't like you." That was it. The last straw. I didn't wait for an answer before saying, "This is me, Mom. I'm just not the doormat you've gotten used to." With a gratifying thump, I closed my laptop after selecting Leave Meeting. The text began right away. "Mother. You didn't have to humiliate us like that." Sarah said, "We were trying to have a conversation." Mark said, "You've changed. I hope you're happy leaving your family behind." Aunt Linda said, "I can't believe how disrespectful you were to your parents." I disregarded them all. I no longer owed them an explanation. But despite my sense of justification, I was powerless to stop the guilt from eating at me. I had always been the good girl, the responsible daughter who never got into trouble, growing up. It felt strange to stand up for myself, like if I were violating some holy family law. I sat with a glass of wine on my couch that evening and tried to take it all in. I became increasingly aware that this was about more than just money and space as I gave it more attention. It has to do with control. My family had depended on me for years, thinking I would always be compliant. They turned against me as soon as I left that position. I have no regrets about my remarks throughout the meeting. It was the first honest thing I had said to them in years, if anything. I was aware that the worst was yet to come. My family was not going to silently give up. They had only barely begun. I hoped things would settle down after the family gathering. Perhaps I was naive, but I believed that perhaps the surprise of my at last defending myself would cause them to back off, give me room, give themselves time to think. I was mistaken. My refusal to back down simply made things more heated, if anything. I felt as though I had prodded the bear, and it was now using all of its strength to claw back. Boundaries were not something my family respected. They viewed them as obstacles to be surmounted. The attempts to pull me back into the fold were blatantly intrusive, the manipulation became more daring, and the guilt trips became more acute. It took place a few days following the family gathering. My coworker Sam stopped by my office as I was finishing up a customer report. "Hey, Sarah, some woman called reception asking for you and said she was your mom. She left a message with Emily, but I think you should hear it." I felt sick to my stomach. Emily gave me a sticky note while wearing a perplexed expression, and I followed him to reception. The message said, "This is Sarah's mother, Nancy Evans. We're going through a difficult moment, and I need to talk to her about some pressing family issues that may be interfering with her ability to concentrate at work. Please urge her to take the initiative. Thank you." I froze, looking at the message as if it were about to burn in my palms. My mother had contacted my place of employment. My workplace, not to see how I was doing, nor because of an emergency, but to leave a note implying that I wasn't doing my share to support the family. I was embarrassed, enraged. I crumpled up the message, my face burning. Sam smiled awkwardly at me. Everything okay?" I gave a rigid nod. "Yeah, it's fine, just family stuff." However, it wasn't good. As soon as I got home that night, I called my mother. "Why would you call my work, Mom? That's completely out of line." She sounded angry, as if I were the one who was being unfair. "I had to get your attention somehow. You're not listening to us, Sarah. Maybe hearing it from someone at work will help you see how serious this is." What I was hearing was unbelievable. "My work has nothing to do with you or Mark or your bills. You can't drag my professional life into this." Mom didn't think twice. "We're your family. We come first. You need to start acting like it." "No," I firmly answered. "I don't. I need you to respect my boundaries, and I need you to leave my job out of this." "Limits?" She laughed. "This isn't about boundaries, Sarah. This is about family loyalty. You're abandoning us and you don't even see it." I ended the call. Arguments were pointless. Nothing I said would convince my mother to change her story because she was so engrossed in it. When I woke up the following day, I was inundated with alerts. I knew who it was without even looking at my phone. My brother Mark had indeed made a Facebook post. His initial post was ambiguous, just enough to evoke pity without providing specifics. "Mark Evans. You discover your true family during difficult times. When it's inconvenient for them, some people lose track of their origins. Even though we're trying our hardest, it's difficult when some folks refuse to help." The comments came flooding in. "Mark, keep going, you're capable. Family is the most important thing. One day, whoever is disappointing you will come to repent it. Toxic people are not necessary in your life. Pay attention to your lovely family." But the best part was when Mark himself sent out a direct message. "Mark, Jason is constantly inquiring as to why you no longer come. Are you okay with me telling him that his aunt doesn't give a damn about him?" I sat there looking at my phone, feeling both angry and sad. Knowing how much I loved Mark's children, I detested the way he used them as a weapon against me. However, I was also aware that this was typical Mark behavior: play the victim, elicit pity, and paint me as the bad guy. I declined to respond. I refused to play his game. My parents were bound to try something different eventually. It was to be anticipated. I was enjoying some rare quiet time that Saturday morning while drinking coffee when someone knocked on my door. As I looked through the peephole, my heart fell. There they were, Dad and Mom, standing on my porch, Mom holding a manila envelope. I contemplated not responding. I knew they wouldn't go, but I might have acted as though I wasn't home. I inhaled deeply before opening the door. I said, "What are you doing here?" Without even waiting for an invitation, Mom took action. Dad followed her as she pushed past me. As though they owned the place, they took a seat on my couch, and Mom took out the folder. "We need to talk about finances," she continued, laying out receipts and bills on my coffee table. I gave my temples a rub. "Mom, we've been through this? I'm not paying for a house I don't live in anymore." With a stern voice, Dad said, "Sarah, you don't understand. We're struggling. Mark's struggling. The roof needs to be fixed before winter, and there are school fees for Jason and Liam. It's not just about you." I exploded. "It's always about me, Dad. It's about what I can give, what I can pay for, what sacrifices I can make to keep everyone else comfortable. Well, I'm done. I'm not your ATM, and I'm not responsible for Mark's problems. We're not asking for much, Sarah. Just $2,000 a month to help with the basics. Is that really so unreasonable? Mom shot back, her voice cracking. Stunned, I gazed at her. You think $2,000 a month is not much? Are you hearing yourself right now? From there, the discussion took a turn for the worse. They always responded with blame and guilt whenever I attempted to defend my position. After everything we've done for you, family is supposed to help each other. Mark has kids to think about. Sarah, you don't understand because you're single. I had finally had enough. I got up and gestured toward the door. You need to leave. Mom looked at me as if I had given her a slap. Sarah. They gathered their belongings and departed, slamming the door behind them, but Dad murmured something under his breath now. I collapsed onto the couch once they were gone, feeling as though I had just finished a marathon. My chest felt constricted, and my head was thumping. I kept thinking about the dispute, my dad's disappointment, my mom's tears, and how I felt like I was failing them. But I knew in my heart that I wasn't. I was simply worn out. I'm sick of having to make repairs all the time. I'm fed up with being the good daughter who gave up everything for different people. I was in a trance for the remainder of the day, oscillating between melancholy and anger. I was starting to feel the effects of the pressure, guilt, and relentless manipulation. I understood for the first time that this was more than a passing dispute. Unless I broke it, this loop would continue indefinitely. I vowed to myself as I laid in bed that night, I would not allow them to pull me back in. I would not back down no matter how much they tried to guilt me or how hard they pushed me. Stopping being their crotch was something I owed to myself. But they weren't finished yet, as I would soon discover. By no means. Upon my parents' unexpected arrival and their ridiculous demand for $2,000 per month, I believed I had seen every trick in the book. I believed I was at last ready for their guilt trips and emotional blackmail. I convinced myself that if I stood my ground, they would back off. Those who thrive on control, however, have a tendency to persevere. They get more intense. The following week felt like a pressure cooker. In little time at all, my parents quickly spread the word about their egotistical daughter leaving them when they needed her most. It wasn't until I began receiving calls and texts from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years that I realized how far they had gone. First, it was my Uncle Gary once more, who always managed to keep the peace in the family. Uncle Gary, he said. Sarah, your mom called me crying. She's heartbroken about everything that's happening. I get that you're upset, but can't you just compromise a little? Family is more important than pride. I tightened my jaw as I gazed at my phone. How did pride enter into this? Was it prideful to spend half the month living out of a suitcase and not want to pay someone else's mortgage? My cousin Rachel, who enjoys pushing her nose where it doesn't belong, then sent me a note. Rachel, I don't mean to be impolite, but this is a little ridiculous. Are you simply allowing your brother and his children to suffer, Sarah? It's chilly. I didn't believe you were that way. Whatever the truth, my parents had created their own version of events, making me the bad guy, the one who had deserted her family, the one who was more concerned with money than her sad brother and his helpless kids, and they made me the black sheep overnight, and it worked. Naturally, my brother Mark seized the opportunity to stoke the fires, posting more frequently and sharply on social media. Some people say they care about family, but when times get tough, they're nowhere to be found, Mark wrote on Facebook. Even if it means bearing this burden alone, I'll stop at nothing to ensure my children are happy. My phone buzzed with a notice from a group chat that my cousins and I were sharing, and I chose to ignore it until Rachel shared a screenshot of Mark's most recent message, adding, "Yikes, he's talking about you, isn't he?" His friends and random acquaintances flooded the comments with sympathy and encouragement, but no one knew the truth, and Mark didn't care. The humiliation was unbearable to me. Mark knew exactly what he was doing, portraying himself as the father who never gives up, the struggling hero, and me as the cold-hearted, self-centered sister who refused to help. My mother crossed another line just when I thought things couldn't get any worse. On Tuesday morning, I was in the middle of a conference call when my employer, Tom, knocked on my office door. Tom was uneasy. "May I speak with you for a moment, Sarah?" Dread gripped my gut as I nodded and muted my phone, and Tom shut the door behind him and took a seat across from me. "Your mom called the office again," he added with care. "She didn't speak to me directly, but she left a message with reception." My face flushed with shame. "I'm really sorry. I'll take care of it." "It's okay," Tom said, raising his hand. "Family matters come up. I wanted to make sure that everything was well. Please let me know if you require time off for whatever reason." I answered sharply, "There's nothing going on." And I detested the fact that my mother had brought my work life into her mess. "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again," I continued. My work was the one place I'd managed to keep apart from my family's craziness, and now she was invading it too. Tom nodded and walked away, but the damage was done. I felt ashamed and remained at my desk for a long time, staring blankly at my computer screen. How did she? My parents were trying harder, my brother was using his children as weapons, and the rest of the family had taken sides. By the end of the week, I was emotionally spent. The texts, phone calls, and gossip felt unrelenting, and I couldn't go a day without someone attempting to manipulate or guilt-trip me back into submission. I had just finished cleaning my apartment on a Saturday afternoon when I heard a knock on the door. I knew immediately who it was without even looking through the peephole, so I opened it to find Mark standing there with his arms crossed and a frown on his face. This was the last straw. "What are you doing here, Mark?" I inquired. He didn't waste time making small talk. "Sarah, we must speak. This has continued for too long." I stopped the doorway by crossing my arms. "No, Mark, there's no need for conversation. You must go." He raised his voice and screamed, "You don't get to just walk away from your family." Jason and Liam couldn't comprehend why their aunt no longer cared about them. "Mom and Dad are losing their hearts because of you. You're shattering mine." Something broke inside of me. "I'm not the one who left, Mark. You did that because you believed that I owed you something simply because I put in more effort and made wiser decisions, and that I should clean up your mess. I finished carrying you." For once, Mark had no rebuttal and appeared astonished, as if no one had ever spoken to him in that manner. "Go home, Mark," I murmured softly. "Nurse your own family. I'm finished." When I heard his footsteps departing, I felt a wave of tiredness slam over me. I stood there trembling for a second, half expecting him to knock again or yell through the door, but he didn't. My family wasn't just requesting assistance, they felt entitled to it. My money, my time, my life, and when I dared to refuse, they made it their mission to punish me for it. I sat on my couch that night and stared at the wall, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months, including the eviction from my basement suite, the incessant guilt trips, the invasion of my workplace, and the lies Mark spread online. At that moment, I understood that I had two options. I could either walk away from this losing war or continue to fight it. One of the few people who had supported me during this ordeal was my buddy Jessica, whom I called the following morning. "Jess, I'm moving," I declared. "Where are you moving?" "I'm not sure yet. Outside the state. A long way off. I require a new beginning." Without hesitation, Jessica said, "Good. You're worthy. Sarah, do it for you." I put the pieces in motion over the course of the following 2 weeks, applying for a job transfer within my organization and beginning my search for apartments in Charlotte, North Carolina, a city I had always wanted to visit because it was close enough to provide me with space without making me feel like I was running away. I placed a brief letter on the kitchen table at my previous residence on the day I packed up my car and left Columbus, but I kept it a secret from both Mark and my parents. "I can't continue living this way, even though I love you. One day, I hope you'll understand." I don't know if they ever will. As I drove down the highway toward Charlotte, I experienced a strange range of emotions, including relief, anger for the way my family treated me, and grief for the family I had to leave behind. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from obligations that weren't mine, free from guilt, and free to start over. The kilometers behind me made it clear to me that I was choosing myself, and for once, that was sufficient rather than fleeing. Am I the asshole for exposing my company's secret parent benefits that gave them thousands in extra perks while non-parents got nothing? Original post. I work for an organization that prides itself on being generous and flexible to parents. I fully support that, despite the usual gripes among the childless employees you might imagine, e.g., we are asked to work more weekends and nights. A colleague of mine, a parent, is leaving the org and invited me to coffee. I thought it was just to have a farewell chat, but it turns out they feel that the difference in parent versus non-parent benefits is so drastic they don't feel right leaving without telling someone. They let me know how stark the difference is, and it's way beyond anything I've seen before. It turns out parents in my org are offered, when they are hired or become parents, a special benefits package called family benefits. This is not in any paperwork I have access to, including my onboarding work and employee handbook, and those who partake are asked to not share information about it with non-parents, ostensibly to avoid any tension with childless employees. But the real reason is far more clear. It's because they don't want us to know how bad the difference is. The family package includes 10 extra days of PTO, 3 sick, 2 personal, 5 vacation. We have access to specific facilities, gym, pool, etc., and the family benefits package gives free gym membership and swim lessons to you, your spouse, and your children. I can only get those at a 50% discount, and my spouse gets no discount at all. Officially, we're a one remote day a week organization. Those with children are allowed to be remote anytime schools are out. This includes staff members whose kids aren't school age yet, and the entire summer. We have several weekend evening events we volunteer for, where volunteering gives you comp time. If you're a parent who volunteers and calls out day of due to childcare, you still get your comp day. As you might imagine, every event usually has about 25 to 30 people call out due to childcare. If the special event is child-focused, parents are exempt from volunteering and can attend with their family as guests, and they still get comp time. There's an affiliate discount program that includes discounts to major businesses not offered to child-free employees, not just child-specific businesses, but movie theaters, ride-sharing apps, and chain stores. We get a card we can add pre-tax commuting funds to, but parents in this program get a bonus of $100 a month. We get retirement matching up to 2.5%, but parents get up to 5%. If you need to leave to pick up kids from school, you don't have to work once you get home. As you might imagine, when given written permission to pass tasks off to others and log off at 2:30 p.m., almost everyone does. All told, my colleague estimates that as a parent of 2 children, they saved upwards of $18,000 worth a year in benefits that are not available to me, in addition to the non-monetary benefits, like time saved not having to commute anytime schools are out, basically free comp time. I'm all for flexibility for parents, but knowing that my organization is secretly, giving parents this volume of bonus benefits has me feeling disgusted at my org and disappointed in my colleagues who have kept it quiet. How do I approach this? Do I reach out to HR? Do I pretend it never happened and move forward? Is this even legal? I'm already planning to leave, and was considering telling my fellow child-free colleagues before I left, but right now I'm just feeling so lost. Update. Thanks to you and everyone in the comments for, before anything else, validating my opinions that this is bananas. A few notes, answers. The child-free staff obviously noticed a lot of these things, most of them, even. We just didn't assume our organization's supervisors are running a secret benefits club, because that would be insane, right? To give some examples, most colleagues with kids made one weekly appearance in the office during the summer, so we attributed the extra remote days to their managers being nice, not a formal policy exemption. We'd see coworkers attend events as guests, and loved when they believed in our events enough to bring their families. But we didn't know they still got comp time. Honestly, the only people who took 100% advantage of every perk offered, no questions asked, were independently known to be asshats. My favorite example, my boss is universally loathed in the office. They're the kind of person who emails you projects on Saturday night, texts you about it on Sunday morning, then yells at you if it's not done Monday morning before they hand me all their work to leave the office at 2 p.m. The office has lovingly nicknamed them NWC for no white clothes, because you'll never see them in the office between Memorial Day and Labor Day. Someone in the comments questioned how the child-free managers felt about this, and it helped me realize that every single person in the C-suite and director level had kids, as did probably 2/3 of the manager level. Most of the managers who didn't have kids living with them were older empty nesters who did have kids under their roof at one point too. I honestly couldn't think of a single parent who didn't report to another parent. But I doubt that had anything to do with these policies. Rolls eyes as high as possible. I should say, that didn't impact who did or didn't get promoted into certain roles. Parents and non-parents alike were deservedly hired or promoted from within. It did obviously impact which supervisor was assigned to which person. Yes, apparently if you have your first child while working there, you then get told about the expanded benefits packages to accommodate your new family. It seems the colleagues are so pleasantly surprised at all the benefits they aren't retroactively angry. Or maybe they are and feel it's better to keep the secret. We do have a small, understaffed HR department. One person who is basically the liaison between us and a PEO for benefits and payroll, and a director who mostly does interviews and handles complaints. Both parents. To try and fix this, especially because I had been regularly interviewing to leave and didn't want to do it alone in the event I got a new job and left it behind, I spoke to some trusted colleagues, one a parent and 2 child-free. The colleague who was a parent, I also learned, had joined as a parent and was not given a big, "don't tell the others" speech. It was just suggested they have discretion around benefits so we don't let money get in the way of teamwork. The 2 child-free colleagues had no idea about this and were enraged. The 4 of us met and, the Monday after your answer, put together some language and emailed our HR department and managers to outline that we knew about the benefits differences and were 100% prepared to publicly share with the full organization and an employment lawyer if they did not work to balance out the benefits, or at least publicize the differences so non-parents can choose whether or not they want to work here. I got a response that they'd be looking into it, and suddenly a number of directors and managers, including my boss, the C-suite, HR, and some board members were meeting for hours at a time that week. That Friday, an email went out that basically said benefits would be changing to match the changing needs of our organization. However, it didn't acknowledge previous differences. Generally, it meant that non-parents got the extra time off, comp days are only given if you complete a volunteer shift, and we would have a universal in-office day of Wednesday during the summers, but be remote the other 4 days. However, some benefits weren't changing. You were still only eligible for family gym memberships if you had kids. There is no couples membership at organization, so non-families were just SOL. Leaving early without taking PTO was only for school pickups, and no announced change to our retirement benefits. If we were not happy with the response, we weren't. My colleagues and I were planning to tell everyone, but we didn't even have to. Sadly, I missed this while out of town for a wedding, but apparently a parent in the office got this email just before entering a Zoom. He didn't realize there were some non-parents already logged on and said out loud to another parent something along the lines of, "Did anyone else see this? I don't get it. It's just our benefit, but now I have to be in on Wednesdays." Cue the questions. Cue the firestorm. Cue everyone being told to log off and go home at noon on a Friday. Since then, multiple people have quit out of pure rage, including some parents who were also told to have discretion and were disgusted with the org. The C-level exec who originally spearheaded these benefits resigned, and all the non-parents have collectively agreed to refuse to go in the office until everything is more equal. Almost every benefit that was given to parents will now be offered org-wide. They are even creating a couples gym membership, but, interestingly, they have not touched the one thing that seemed to rile up the comments section the most: retirement matching. Apparently, because families with kids spend more money, and the changing economy means more young adults need financial support from their parents in their 20s, parents need more money in retirement to make up for it. This is a sticking point the non-parents are really fighting against, and the org seems to be adamant they won't budge on. Lucky for me, the reason I'm not joining them in that good fight is that I'm writing this having submitted my 2 weeks. Found an interesting new job, and used your advice on interviews and in negotiations, and submitted my notice. There was still some drama. My aforementioned asshat boss NWC responded by taking multiple projects away from my fellow non-parents, saying they can't do it while on their remote strike, and assigning them to me, when 120 hours of group work to be done alone in 10 working days. Extra lucky for me, I have a family member and a college friend who are both employment lawyers. They helped me craft an email saying that because I've been assigned an unreasonable amount of work on an impossible timeline after being a whistleblower for the benefits issue, I could and would sue for retaliation. An hour later I got a call from HR letting me know that my work had been reassigned and that once I'd finished editing an exit doc for my successor, I could log off permanently and still be paid for the full notice period and get my vacation payouts. Currently basking in the glow of paid fun employment. When I'm done writing this, my wife and I are going to get drinks and lunch. At 2 in the afternoon, on a Tuesday? Thanks again to the comments for the suggestions and making me feel less like a bewildered baboon, and to you for your sage advice with this question and so many others. I'm aware of my privilege in having understanding colleagues and literally being able to text 2 employment lawyers and get good, pro bono advice within a day. Not everyone has that, so thank you for providing the resource. My parents disowned me and cut me out of their will because I'm not their biological child, but inheriting from a distant relative changed everything. Let us start from the beginning. My life changed dramatically when I was 14. Around this time, my mother decided to relax again. This time with a man whose previous marriage had produced a son. Jake, already 3 years older than me, was 17. Let's also admit that we didn't get along right away. The ink on their marriage certificate had hardly dried when the tension began to rise. At first, it was the tiny issues that arise when strangers are notified that they are suddenly family and brought together. Jake would leave dirty dishes in the sink, assuming they would clean themselves. Of course, I was the one who got a lecture from my mother or new stepfather about the kitchen mess. Alternatively, I would see my shampoo disappearing faster than usual, only to discover Jake with perfectly maintained hair that appeared to have resulted from using my favorite product. It was strange, but I felt upset by more than just Jake's antics. Tom, my stepfather, handled things in the same manner. I seemed to be the problem whenever things went wrong. He'd think I was responsible without even asking. Then there was my mom. She was too focused on making this new family dynamic work to see what was happening. She'd brush it off, cover for Jake, and pretend everything was fine. I could immediately detect the difference in expectations. Mom and Tom announced they were expecting a kid around a year into our difficult living situation. At that time, everything changed. Suddenly, everything revolved around the newborn. The house required renovations, and guess which room was chosen for the nursery? Exactly, mine. I was shoved into a cramped, claustrophobic guest room with barely enough room for my possessions. It felt like a demotion, a clear sign of my role in this new family structure. A few months later, Nathan, my new half-brother, was born and quickly became the center of attention. Jake felt the same shift and grew even more entitled. He dropped out of college and moved back home, bringing with him a whirlwind of late-night parties and questionable pals who came and went at all hours. Tom dismissed my protests about the noise and trash, while my mother simply looked sorrowful, as if to say, "What can we do?" It was infuriating. I started spending more time at friends' places, anywhere I could find routine. My escape ended up being school. I stayed as long as I could, joining every organization and taking extra classes. It was more than just adolescent defiance. It was about survival. Home became a place where I always felt as if I was walking on eggshells, waiting for the next explosion. It was suffocating. One evening stands vividly in my mind. I got home later than usual to find the house utterly still. A note on the refrigerator indicated that they had gone out to dinner, without me. I hadn't even been invited to this family supper. That note struck harder than I expected. I felt invisible, as if I did not truly belong. And it stung. Not shortly after my 18th birthday, everything almost broke. I felt Tom disliked me having any excuse to leave the house, despite the fact that I worked part-time. He repeatedly told me that it would jeopardize my academic progress. Then one evening, I returned home to discover my room utterly trashed. Jake hosted a party while my mom and Tom were gone, and my room suffered as a result. A broken lamp, alcohol stains on my project documentation. It was an outright breach of my privacy. I challenged them at breakfast the next morning. Tom responded coldly and contemptuously, "You should have been more responsible with your belongings." My mother simply sighed and whispered something about families coming together and letting go. I had finished letting things pass. Everything I did during those years seemed to be scrutinized, but not in a way that suggested concern for my well-being. Rather, it appeared like they were waiting for me to make a mistake so they could blame me. Jake, who had turned into a professional couch potato, appeared to get away with it all. Although Nathan, my tiny half-brother, was still a child, the amount of coddling he received revealed who the favorite was. I remember one time when I was working on a large science project that I found really interesting. Even at home, working on it was nearly impossible. I desired silence, so I set up a workstation in the corner of the living room. It felt like I was trying to build something delicate in the heart of Times Square. I eventually had enough. Jake would play loud music, Nathan would run about shouting, and Tom would complain about how my project was taking up too much space or making a mess. After packing, I went to see a buddy, whose parents allowed me to work in their tranquil dining room. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was able to concentrate. That was when I realized how odd my home life had become. My friend said, "You're always welcome here." The invitation was easy, yet it meant everything to me. For me, home was just a place I couldn't wait to leave. Home is supposed to be a secure refuge, yet every hour away from it helped me breathe a little easier. I started working extra shifts at my job. Of course, Tom didn't like it. He frequently mentioned my job as a distraction from school, but I knew why he disliked it. I wasn't around as much for him to critique. As I accumulated more money, the thought of moving out began to form in my head, but I realized it would not be easy. My mother and Tom were unable of dealing with the situation. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the only option to regain control of my life. I was a ball of worry the day I decided to inform them I was leaving. I discovered a basic yet fairly priced apartment near my campus. From my part-time employment, I had saved enough to cover the first 3 months' rent. It wasn't a lot, but it was mine. The prospect of having my own life and space kept me focused. One evening, after dinner, I seated Tom and Mom at the kitchen table. With my heart pumping, I attempted to keep my voice calm. I looked them in the eyes and said, "I'm moving out." The room became silent, and I could feel the tension mounting. You could have heard a pin drop. Tom was the first to reply. He smiled, shook his head and said, as if I had told him the most stupid thing imaginable, "You think you're ready to live on your own, just because of your age?" His voice was filled with amazement and a trace of mockery. At first, my mother said nothing. She simply sat there, staring down at the table, her expression unreadable. "I am ready," I said, attempting to sound more confident than I felt. The disagreement began when I stated that I needed my own room and had enough savings to cover it. Tom went on a rampage, accusing me. I was selfish, unappreciative, and tried to avoid my responsibilities at home. "He looks up to you, you know?" he continued, attempting to guilt me into leaving Nathan behind. As if that were enough to keep me in a hazardous atmosphere. My mother's response was calmer, but no less devastating. She did not dispute with me, like Tom did, nor did she attempt to stop me. She only continued to complain, saying things like, "Families stick together, and you'll regret it if you leave." But I knew better. This was not about family. It was about control. I stayed put not because I just desired my own space, but because I needed it for my emotional and psychological well-being. I felt like an outsider in my supposed home. I was tired of being held accountable for things beyond my control and of attempting to fit into a family that had made it apparent that I was not actually a member of it. I spent the following few days preparing. Every item I packed into a box felt like a step closer to independence, even though it wasn't easy. My mother entered my room on the morning I was supposed to leave. I readied myself for another battle, but it never happened. Instead, she helped me pack discreetly. Our conversation was brief. She asked whether I needed extra boxes or offered to donate old utensils. We both appeared to be avoiding the actual concerns, making light talk to avoid admitting that this was the end of something. Later that day, when I locked the door to my new flat, I experienced an uncommon range of feelings, including relief, grief, excitement, and worry. I was now living completely on my own. It felt simultaneously liberated and terrible. The first few nights were the most challenging. The flat seemed overwhelmingly empty and quiet. I found myself longing even the disagreeable sounds of home, like Jake's loud music, Nathan running around, and Tom's incessant nagging. However, as the days passed into weeks, I grew to cherish the silence. For the first time in years, I could actually breathe. I no longer had to tiptoe around the house, worrying about Tom's mood swings or whether Jake had hosted another party. I could come and go as I liked, eat when I wanted, and sleep uninterrupted. It seemed like I was finally discovering who I was beyond the insanity of my family. A new type of freedom. Life rapidly found its groove. I balanced work, education, and maintaining my modest apartment. It was not flashy, but it was mine. My connection with my mother and Tom improved slightly after I moved out of their house. I kept my distance but saw them sometimes, which made things easier. Then, unexpectedly, I received a call from my mother. Her speech was muted and more light than normal. "Tom's been thinking about his will," she added, simply as if discussing the weather. "He wants to make sure everything is in order." I reacted hesitantly, not sure where this was going. After a pause, she said, "He has decided to include Jake and Nathan but not you. Because they are his biological children, he believes it is more rational." There it was. It stings. Although I hadn't expected much from Tom, seeing it stated so bluntly hurt me harder than I anticipated. It wasn't about the money, but about the message. The reminder that, despite all these years, I was still not regarded as a member of the family. I forced myself to answer neutrally. "I understand." Mom, maybe sensing the hurt, hastily attempted to ease the impact. "You understand, this is just legal things. It doesn't impact our feelings for you, right?" Even if I didn't believe her, I allowed the conversation to divert to other issues. But the harm was already done. That night I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, with that familiar sense of not belonging gnawing at me. Part of me wanted to confront Tom, demand an explanation, or simply tell him how deeply it hurt. However, another part of me questioned the point. For years, that family had not felt like a part of me, so why should it matter now? I ultimately decided to back off. I reduced my visits, stayed busy with school and work, and spent more time cultivating relationships with people who actually appreciated me. Friends, instructors, and co-workers who loved me for who I was, not for what I could contribute or because we had once shared a home. These were the individuals that mattered. The anguish from Tom's will and years of feeling like an outsider began to recede. It wasn't an overnight metamorphosis, but the hatred subsided, though it would occasionally boil up, especially at family events, when I saw Jake and Nathan relishing in the spotlight. I began to realize that some things were beyond my control. I started establishing my own family and sense of belonging. A few months later, Tom recovered from his health scare and their lives resumed to normal. Then came the actual test. I was invited to a family dinner to celebrate Tom's recovery. I went out of responsibility, rather than choice. The evening was just as awkward as I expected. Tom talked about his recuperation. Everyone gushed about Nathan's newest academic accomplishments, and Jake boasted about a new job he had suddenly landed. I sat there relatively silent, and it was painfully obvious that I was the odd one out. However, this time it stung less. I had come to terms with my status in the family. I was the outsider, yet there were individuals in my life that cared for me for myself, not because of family obligations or shared DNA. I made an excuse about an early start and went after dinner. As I drove home, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders. I'm good, I told myself. Really good. I dealt with the emotional impact, faced the truth of my situation, and emerged stronger and more confident in myself than ever before. For the first time in years, I felt peaceful. But life had another surprise in store. Just when I thought I had finally achieved some calm and routine, everything turned upside down again. One afternoon, I got a call from a lawyer I'd never heard of. His tone was courteous and professional, but his voice had an almost apologetic aspect. "Am I speaking with Jessica Evans?" he inquired. "Yes, that's me," I explained, bewildered. "I'm calling about Margaret Evans, your great-aunt's estate," he explained, his tone slow and measured. "She passed away recently and named you as the sole beneficiary." For a little period I fell silent. I couldn't recall Aunt Margaret. She was one of those distant relatives you'd hear about but never actually knew. She didn't have any children, and I faintly remembered my father mentioning her once or twice as someone who had helped raise him. I hadn't seen her in years, possibly since I was a tiny child. And now I'm being informed she's left everything to me. "I'm sorry for your loss," the lawyer said, breaking the stillness. She was a remarkable woman. Still absorbing his remarks, I blurted out a thank you. Then, half expecting it to be something simple, perhaps an old house or a few family heirlooms, I inquired, "Exactly what did she leave behind?" "Your great-aunt was quite well off," he said. "Over the years, she made some excellent investments. The estate contains various properties, a significant stock portfolio, and a trust fund worth approximately $3 million. My heart halted for a moment. I sat there gripping my phone thinking, why me? We weren't very close. When I was younger, I paid her a few trips, but our relationship was never genuinely strong. My mind could not fully grasp it. The attorney then stated, "She left a letter for you. I will forward it together with the other documents." He noted that she went into greater detail regarding her decision. After we hung up, I sat there staring at my phone, trying to make sense of everything. Why did Aunt Margaret chose me to inherit everything? I scarcely know her. Was this some kind of mistake? The next few days were spent meeting with the attorney, signing paperwork, and discovering exactly what I had inherited. There were houses, stocks, and personal stuff in addition to the money. Aunt Margaret's letter, however, impacted me deeply. In it, she stated that she had always appreciated my independence and saw in me a reflection of herself at my age. She described me as determined, self-sufficient, and capable of creating a life on my own, qualities she thought she lacked when she was younger. She wanted to offer me the opportunity to spend her riches for something meaningful. It was overwhelming. Here was this relative I barely knew, who saw something in me that my own family hadn't noticed. She appreciated and chose me. My initial move was to purchase a tiny home. Though it wasn't lavish, it was mine and represented a new chapter in my life. Thinking about long-term financial security, I also bought a rental property and invested the leftover monies. I spoke with a financial expert to ensure that I made sound judgments. It seemed weird. In the course of a week, my life had entirely changed. I no longer had to scrape by or wonder how I would make ends meet. For the first time, I felt truly secure and free. However, freedom brought a new set of challenges. At first, I didn't notify anyone about the bequest, even my relatives. Given our tumultuous past, I knew the news would not be well received. I owe them nothing. But secrets have a way of getting out, and mine was no exception. It began with a cousin I hadn't seen in years, who heard about the inheritance through legal means. My mother found out before I did, and the rest of the family soon followed suit. The phone calls started almost immediately. First, my mother called in an unusually cheerful and inquisitive tone. She complimented me, then casually stated how difficult things had been financially for her and Tom. I sensed where the talk was going, and sure enough, the floodgates erupted. Tom called first, then Jake, and then some distant cousins I hadn't heard from in years. Each intimated, in their own way, that they needed a piece of my inheritance. "Times are tough," they would say. My mother even commented, "You know how bad Tom's health has been," as if this explained their newfound interest in me. They all seemed to have forgotten about me, but only as a possible ATM. I was overwhelmed with requests for money, loans, and gifts. It felt like vultures were circling, waiting for their time to swoop down. I felt overwhelmed. For a brief period, I considered quitting up, questioning whether holding on to the bequest was selfish. But then I remembered all the years I'd spent feeling like an outsider in my own family, being blamed, discarded, and ignored. I had worked hard to earn whatever I had before this windfall. I had gotten it through college on my own without their help, and now that I had some stability, they wanted to take it away. When I was struggling, none of them volunteered to help. When my mother eventually inquired why I hadn't told her about the bequest sooner, I found the strength to reject the guilt and manipulation. I softly but firmly explained to her that our separation was both emotional and physical. I had been kept away, ignored, and alienated for years, as if I belonged nowhere in the family. This inheritance allowed me to live on my own, without relying on anybody else. It is my life, I assured her, and I must live it in my own manner. I apologize if this offends you, but right now I need to act in my best interests. The outcome of that conversation was worse than I could have predicted. Mom accused me of being arrogant and inconsiderate. Tom interjected, chastising me about how families should treat one another. Nonetheless, I stood my ground. Over time the calls got less frequent, and the demands for money ceased when they understood I would not give in. It was challenging, but extremely necessary. I had realized a sad reality about family. Sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who bring you down. Knowing that I had protected myself brought me calm. Finally, I decided not to let them dictate my life. This inheritance was about taking control of my own destiny and, more importantly, gaining the ability to live my life on my own terms. My communication with them became strained, but I'd become accustomed to it. Their approval was no longer required, and I was not bound to offer them anything. I had friends, mentors, and people who actually cared about me. Not because of familial obligations, but because of who I was. The big surprise came from an unexpected source. My younger half-brother, Nathan. I unexpectedly received a clumsy handwritten note from him. "I'm sorry for asking for money. I miss you," he wrote in his untidy handwriting. Though little, this step meant a lot to me. Nathan, barely 14, was reaching out in his own way. After that, we started texting. Little conversations about his school and interests. Nothing too serious, but it was something. It was the start of a modest bridge between us, even though I wasn't optimistic about reconciling with the rest of the family. I was creating a life for myself, free of need on anyone else. For the first time in years I felt completely free. However, the impression of tranquility was fleeting. Just as I thought things had settled down, my mother contacted me again a few weeks after Nathan's letter. This time, she wished to talk things over. I could tell this wasn't going to be a chat about reconnecting or finding common ground, so I agreed to see her in public in the hopes of keeping things nice. We met at a nearby cafe and the vibe was unsettling from the start. She rarely inquired about my life or how I was doing. Instead, she got right into how difficult things had been financially since Tom's health crisis and how Nathan's private school fees were stacking up. I sat there, listening, feeling like an outsider in her list of troubles. It quickly became evident why she had requested to meet. She also added that they were thinking of upgrading the house and that she really needed a vacation to relieve her stress. It was clear she was not there to heal our relationship. She was there for a single reason. Finally, I could not stand it any longer. I cut through the tension, saying, "Mom, just get to the point." She looked me in the eye and said, without hesitation, "I expect you to write me a check for $1 million. I nearly choked on my coffee. "Excuse me?" I asked incredulously. She did not waver. "It is only fair. Technically, since it came from your father's side of the family, all of that money should have been mine." I was shocked. Her entitlement and audacity were astonishing. She sat there, casually demanding $1 million as if it was her birthright. I said bluntly, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm not giving you $1 million. Her tone moved from entitled to plain angry, and her expression became severe. "You have always been unappreciative of everything we've done for you," she told us. Her remarks painted me as a criminal for not turning her the money she claimed she was owed. Without turning back, I paid the money and left the cafe. It still surprises me that my own mother attempted to guilt me into giving her money to which she had no right. What followed was even worse. A few days later, my mother started circulating rumors. She informed everybody who would listen that I had stolen the inheritance, saying it was rightfully hers, and accused me of hoarding it out of greed. Suddenly, relatives I hadn't heard from in years began calling, either to support her or to pressure me into sharing the money. The hypocrisy was staggering, especially given that Tom had omitted me from his own will because I wasn't family. Even Tom got involved, writing me a long guilt-ridden text about how I needed to consider the family and make more inclusive decisions. I reacted in a single sentence. "You didn't include me in your will because I'm not family, remember?" That shut him off for a while. But the drama did not end there. Things got heated when I received an official-looking letter in the mail. To my amazement, my mother was suing me. Yes, you read that correctly. She was suing me for a share of the inheritance, claiming that as my father's widow, she was entitled to a large amount of the money. I was stunned. Was my own mother dragging me to court? I could not believe it. At first I was afraid, expecting a protracted and costly court battle. I called my attorney, who laughed after reading the letter. "This is a joke," he remarked, flinging the letter away. "The will is airtight." He next investigated the so-called attorney who had sent the letter. The phone number was disconnected, and the address on the letterhead was for a decrepit building under construction. It became evident that my mother and Tom had engaged a dodgy, most certainly fraudulent lawyer in a last-ditch attempt to terrify me into paying them money. While I was happy that the lawsuit was unfounded, I was also terribly disappointed. Their willingness to go to such lengths for my inheritance was surprising. They had tried guilt-tripping and manipulating me, and now they were making direct legal threats. I was done attempting to salvage any sort of relationship with them. I understood I needed some distance. After the legal jitters passed, the emotional toll hit me hard. I was exhausted, sleep-deprived, and the constant drama was affecting my mental health. That was when I realized I needed a vacation from everything. We decided to take a road trip after talking with some of our friends. Nothing extravagant, just a trip to a couple spots we'd always wanted to go but never got around to. It was just what I needed. Time to clear my mind, escape the chaos and, most importantly, consider what I wanted for my future. As we began the road, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a little period. A year ago, I was barely making it in a house that never felt like home. I now had financial security, my own home, and the freedom to make my own judgments without interference from others. It felt liberating, yet also bittersweet. Growing up, I looked to my mother and stepfather for guidance and encouragement. To me, family meant having someone who would always have your back, no matter what. But through it all, I learned a terrible lesson. Just because someone is family by blood does not guarantee they are there for you in the ways that matter. Throughout the trip, I reflected a lot and realized that I didn't need their money, validation, or acceptance. I had everything I needed, and the relationships I actually valued were those I had formed with people who loved me for who I was, not what I could offer them. In little ways, my friends, colleagues, and even Nathan expressed more genuine care for me than my mother or Tom ever did. Following the trip, I decided to write letters to each family member who had attempted to influence me. I did it for me and not for others. It was my way of achieving closure, expressing what I couldn't say in the heat of the moment. In those letters, I detailed how their actions had harmed me and how, despite my desire to be a member of the family, I was constantly pushed aside. I wished them well and hoped they would move on, just as I had. The only reaction I received came from Nathan. His letter was modest but sincere. "I appreciate you delivering the letter. I miss you. Let us get together sometime." It wasn't much, but it was the beginning. Nathan and I might one day develop something real, free of obligation or manipulation. As for the rest of the family, I had finally accepted that we were better off at a distance. The inheritance had served as a wake-up call. Not just a financial boon, but also a revelation about my true family. It wasn't the folks who raised me. It was those who supported me when I had nothing to offer but myself. Looking back, I don't have any regrets. I stayed firm, safeguarded my future, and found peace by letting go of the poisonous connections that had been holding me back. Life has a peculiar way of teaching us what is actually essential, and I'm glad for that, no matter how harsh the lessons were. Sitting in my own home, surrounded by people who feel more like family than my actual relatives ever did, I know I'm precisely where I should be.